Well, sometimes one good idea is good enough for 2 days. And yesterday's idea, well, it turned into a two-part idea or a 2-day idea. Yesterday we talked about the top 5 Pitt players of the 21st century, and that got me to thinking about some other topics. Some other sort of a topic along the similar lines. I mean, you've already seen the headline. Like, I don't need to like drag it out like, oh, you don't know what I'm going to say. The fact is, when I ran down that list of the top 5 Pitt players of the 21st century, I ended up adding Kenny Pickett as number 5 there. And actually, a lot of people on social media, on the message boards, and in the comments here on YouTube, a lot of people agreed about Kenny Pickett. Thought he was, and some people even said he was the obvious choice for that number 5 spot. And some people put him higher. Some people put him at number 4. So, I just sort of happened upon it at the end. I said, screw it, Kenny Pickett will be number 5. But a lot of people actually feel like that was the right decision, and I don't necessarily disagree. But as I got to thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more it occurred to me that, most of those guys that we're putting in the top 5 Pitt players of the first 25 years of this century, most of those guys are from pre-Pat Narduzzi era. Now, that makes sense. Pat Narduzzi has not been Pitt's coach for the majority of the first quarter century here, but he has been the coach for 10 years out of the 25 of this century, so that's darn near half. And it's interesting that we didn't necessarily jump to put more than one guy from his era in the top 5. So I got to thinking, not necessarily about why didn't we put any guys in there, but let's talk about the Narduzzi era specifically. How about the top 10 players of the Narduzzi era? Who makes that list? Obviously, Kenny Pickett's going to be on there because he was he made the top 5 players of all of the entire 25 years so far this century. But what about just the 10 Narduzzi seasons? Let's go to a top 10 players of Narduzzi's 10 years. Who are the top 10 Pitt players under Pat Narduzzi? Let's run it down here on the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I mean, I guess I already gave away who number 1 is. Like I said, it's obviously Kenny Pickett. To me, it's obvious, Kenny Pickett, Heisman Trophy finalist, the guy who pretty much led Pitt to their most successful season in 40 years. And, an actual championship, the first real piece of conference championship hardware that Pitt has ever won. Kenny Pickett deserves credit for all that. And maybe I did put him too low in the top 5 of all Pitt players in the first 25 years of this century, but that's a conversation for yesterday. We're going to move on now to the top 10 players of the Pat Narduzzi era. You know what we always ask you to do? Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content, whether it's these daily morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. like we did last night, or post-game shows or press conferences, interviews, whatever it may be. We do it all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and the way to make sure you don't miss it is to like and subscribe. So click those buttons. I'll be very happy about it. And then go check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt site on the 247 Sports Network. That's the place we have all of our coverage: Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting. We had some recruiting news to cover yesterday. And then, of course, the transfer portal and everything else going on in the world of Pitt sports. And if you want to interact and hang out with other Pitt fans, the place to do it is the Panther-Lair.com message boards, where Pitt fans are hanging out all day, every day, talking about Pitt sports. Panther-Lair.com. All right, top 10 players of the Pat Narduzzi era. Let's just count them down. We'll start with number 10. Get out of here. He's the tall dog. We'll start with number 10, and we'll work our way down from there. At number 10, and this list is very much subject to change, certainly over the next year. I think it will change over the next year, and number 10 right here has a pretty good chance of climbing. He's actually the only player from the current roster who I have in the top 10 right now, and it's Kyle Lewis. Now, Kyle Lewis jumps in here after a huge season last year. One of the better, probably in terms of all-around stat lines, probably the best all-around stat line for a Pitt defender under Narduzzi. And maybe one of the best all-around stat lines for a Pitt defender going back to like Scott McKillop and H.B. Blades. I mean, 4 interceptions and, double-digit, 15 and a half tackles for loss, like 7 sacks, 100 tackles. I mean, he was all over the field, made lots of plays, earned All-America honors. And quite frankly, if Pitt doesn't completely go in the tank over the final 5 games of the regular season, he probably wins ACC Defensive Player of the Year. He certainly deserved it. His play was at that standard, but the team's success hurt him a little bit, and I think that cost him. Not like Boston College was some juggernaut last year, but Pitt's complete collapse, I think, cost Kyle Lewis an opportunity to be the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. But I have Kyle Lewis at number 10 right here after his All-American season. I think there's a pretty good chance if he builds on last season, which I think he will, he'll move up in this list. I don't know how far he'll build up. Move up. It'll probably depend on how good his season is. But I've got Kyle Lewis at number 10 right now with a real chance to jump. At number 9, and actually we're going to put 8 and 9 together because it's two guys who I think are inextricably linked. For me, they're inextricably linked in Pitt history, inextricably linked in the history of the Pat Narduzzi era. They played the same position, they played with each other, and they kind of earned their honors together, and it's Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. Now, I have Patrick Jones at number 8, I have Rashad Weaver at number 9. You want to flip those two, either way, that's fine with me. You'll get no argument. It's Jones and Weaver are Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. One of them is better, I think, but it's far be it for me to say which one. Or maybe Jones and Weaver are the, they're both Godfather 2. One is just the Vito portion, and one is the Michael portion. And which one's better? Who could say? But either way, both of those guys, just outstanding Pitt careers, All-Americans in 2020, just great performances. I mean, they were monsters off the edge. And really, I think Pitt has spent the last 5 years trying to get back to the level of play at the defensive end position that they had in 2020. They've had nice players since then, but they have not gotten the impact from the defensive end position that they got from Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. And of course, those guys came in together. They were both in the 2016 recruiting class. They were both 2-star prospects in the 2016 recruiting class. Rashad Weaver was committed to Michigan, and then that didn't work out. He ended up back on the market late in the process and came to Pitt. Charlie Partridge liked him a lot. Obviously, Partridge liked Patrick Jones, and Partridge had a lot to do with their recruitment and their development. I think when you look at Charlie Partridge and what he did at Pitt, I mean, it gets complicated when you get into the recruiting in the last couple of years, although even then there were some real hits with Francis Brew and Jasir Whittington, these guys, Isaiah Neal. But I think, there's some real standouts on Charlie Partridge's resume from his time at Pitt, his second stint at Pitt. Kalijah Cansey, that's a Charlie Partridge project right there, from the recruitment through the development and every part of it. Jalen Twyman, one great year in 2019, but it was an unbelievable year in 2019. That's a Charlie Partridge job right there. Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver are the other guys I would put in that group, from the identification, the recruitment, the evaluation, and then the development. And he got the work done with those guys, and they ended up being just outstanding players at Pitt. And so Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones, numbers 8 and 9. I probably have Jones a little bit above Weaver, but not by much. And if you want to argue the other way, I'm totally on board with it. Number 7, I have Brian O'Neill. Now, Brian O'Neill, unlike the others, was not an All-American. Almost every other guy on this list was an All-American. Brian O'Neill was not. But Brian O'Neill, I think, is a really important player in the Pat Narduzzi era at Pitt. Largely because, he switched positions, moved to, from tight end to offensive tackle after Jared Jones-Smith got hurt in 2015, ends up going out, I think it was 2015, that he moved to, I think he did, ends up going out and becoming a multi-year starter, a very good player for Pitt, ends up being a draft pick, having a lot of success in the NFL, and his move there went a long way in stabilizing the offensive line for, 2016, one of the best offenses in Pitt history. And Brian O'Neill wasn't the only piece of the puzzle that helped make that offense so good. There were a lot. Nate Peterman, James Conner, Quadri Henderson, Scott Orndorff, George Aston, the other offensive linemen, Dorian Johnson and Adibis Davadi and Alex Officer and all these guys. But Brian O'Neill, particularly because he had switched positions to move there, I think had a lot to do with the success that Pitt had And, it's always tough for me to put offensive linemen on lists like this. I think when I did the top 5 Pitt players of the 21st century, I didn't include an offensive lineman because, how can I sit back and say Brian O'Neill was better than Darrelle Revis? I mean, maybe he was relative to his position and the importance of that position on the team, but it's hard for me to say that I'm going to put Brian O'Neill ahead of Aaron Donald or LaShawn McCoy or Kenny Pickett. Brian O'Neill played a huge part in the teams he was on, but Kenny Pickett's Kenny Pickett. He was a quarterback, who led the team to 11 wins. So it's a bit tough to fully rank these guys, and maybe O'Neill should even be behind Jones and Weaver. But I think Brian O'Neill was the best offensive lineman of the Pitt era, over the Pat Narduzzi era, I should say. And so I got to have him on this list, and I'm comfortable putting him in at number 7. I think that's a good spot for him to be. At number 6, and you can make a case that this guy should be higher. I have him here, and it's more a credit to the 5 guys I ranked above him than it is a slight on him, because I don't have a lot of negative things to say about how he played at Pitt and his impact that he had at Pitt. And it's James Conner. And James Conner was an outstanding player. His best season was 2014, which was before the Pat Narduzzi era. So maybe I'm splitting hairs with that. Maybe I'm trying to get away with it and say, "Whoa, he had his best seasons before that." But not even that. James Conner, I think, was really, really good. And he was really good for Pitt when Pat Narduzzi was the head coach. He only played 1 game in 2015, but he was really good in 2016 when he came back after cancer. And the thing with Conner, he was a big part of that 2016 team. No question about it. The thing with Conner, though, is he became a symbol. He became something that everyone sort of rallied around. There's often been a conversation about, and I mentioned this yesterday when we talked about Aaron Donald and retiring jersey number 97. And some people from time to time have suggested retiring James Conner's number. And I'm not on board with that. I really think you need to have, you need to achieve at a certain level to get your number retired. That's why I advocate for Donald, not necessarily Revis or McCoy or Conner. But I think, and I've said this, that I think a great way to use James Conner's number, 24, not 40, which he wore when he first arrived, but 24, would be to make it sort of a special reserved number. And you give it to a player at any position who earns it. Now, maybe an offensive lineman wouldn't be able to wear 24, but most positions would be able to wear 24. And you give it to a player who earns it, someone who battles back, who shows resiliency. And you might have years where there's nobody who wears 24. But there'll be, most years there'll be someone who earns it, who sort of embodies that spirit that James Conner showed in overcoming all that he overcame to finish his career with the success he had in 2016. And that goes a long way in moving him up this list, in addition to the fact that he was a really, really good player. So I got James Conner at number 6. At number 5, I have Calijah Kancey. Calijah Kancey, a first-round draft pick, an All-American, an ACC Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, he was outstanding in 2022. If he doesn't get thrown out of the game at North Carolina for targeting, who knows how that game goes. He very well could have turned that game and kept it a Pitt victory. Because Pitt was ahead, I think, at halftime, maybe by like double digits even. I know they had a double-digit lead at some point. I forget if it was at halftime or not. But Calijah Kancey was a big part of that team and that defense. And we just had this conversation on the message boards the other day about how good that defense was in 2022, how much their play contributed to the success that the team had of getting to 9 wins that year. And Calijah Kancey was a big part of that. He was an outstanding player, and his NFL career has lived up to what he did in college, and he's only built on it and been even better. So I've got Calijah Kancey at number 5. At number 4, I've got a guy who played 3 years for Pat Narduzzi. He didn't commit to Pat Narduzzi, but he stood with his Pitt commitment after the coaching change. It's Jordan Whitehead. And Whitehead was really the first superstar Pitt player of the Narduzzi era. In terms of going out and being, playing both ways and being just sort of an outstanding player, a starter right from the jump as a freshman. Jordan Whitehead was a superstar at Pitt kind of bridging the gap a little bit. I don't know. We'll talk about some of the other superstars here in a second, but Jordan Whitehead was, a whippeal guy, an outstanding player at safety, made a lot of big plays, put up a lot of big stats, made plays on offense, and was really only held back by an injury in 2016, and then he was suspended for a game in 2017 or something like that. And then he's gone on to be a really good player in the NFL and had a really long and productive career that doesn't show any signs of slowing it down. So I've got Jordan Whitehead at number 4. At number 3, I have Tyler Boyd. Now, Tyler Boyd was a superstar at Pitt. And I said Jordan Whitehead was the first superstar under Pat Narduzzi. I mean, Tyler Boyd was already here, and Tyler Boyd was already a superstar at Pitt. Tyler Boyd was already one of the best players in the country at his position when Pat Narduzzi arrived. And Boyd already had 2 years on the books. He played 1 year under Narduzzi. It was 2015. He set, at the time, a Pitt record for receptions in a single season. They just gave him the ball all the time. I think Jim Chaney, when he first arrived, they were asking me about his approach on offense or something like that. He said, well, we're going to hand it off to the big kid, meaning James Conner, and we're going to throw it to the fast kid, meaning Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd was he was a great player. And like Whitehead, his NFL career, and Cansey for that matter, even though it's a lot shorter than Whitehead and Boyd, but those guys, their NFL careers have sort of proven out what they did at Pitt. And James Conner too. And Brian O'Neill, and most of these guys on this list, Jones and Weaver, not so much, but O'Neill, Conner, Cansey, Whitehead, Boyd, these guys are doing in the NFL what they did at Pitt, and they're taking it to the next level at the next level. And, so even though Boyd only played 1 year at Pitt, I think he's one of the best receivers in Pitt history. He's probably, top 3 receivers in Pitt history, no worse than top 5. And that, and I think, even though it was only 1 year, I think he makes this. I have him on this list at number 3. Number 2, since I already told you number 1 is, you can probably guess, right? Can you guess who I have as number 2? The number 2 player in the Pat Narduzzi era? It's Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison is the second best receiver in Pitt history. He had the second best receiving season in Pitt history, and he was a dominant force. Kenny Pickett was if you had to pick an individual player who had the most to do with Pitt winning the ACC and winning 11 games in 2021, it would be Kenny Pickett. If you had to pick a second most impactful player, a guy who had the second biggest, who was the second biggest reason they won 11 games that year, is Jordan Addison, and he's not that far behind. Jordan Addison was unbelievable in 2021. Came in with a ton of talent and showed some of it in 2020 and came out in 2021. He was the best receiver in the country. And I had people argue with me about whether or not he should win the Biletnikoff. How could, he was a dominant force, a game-changing player who took over games and literally, with his own 2 hands, won games for Pitt. The Coastal Division clinching game against Virginia, Jordan Addison won that game on his own. Kenny Pickett threw a game-losing interception, and Jordan Addison took the ball away from the Virginia defender, turned around and ran for a touchdown. True story. Jordan Addison won that game. And, it'll go so far as to say that, he could have done it without Kenny Pickett, or I'd put him ahead of Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett's still number 1 in the Narduzzi era, but Jordan Addison's right behind him. And the fact that he transferred, the fact that he left, doesn't change his legacy. It stilts his, stilts his, is that the right word? What are they, stunts? It puts a ceiling on his legacy where he could have been even greater if he came back in 2022 and built on his 2021 season. Stunts, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. It stunts his legacy or something, but it doesn't change the legacy that he carved out in 2021 as one of the greatest receivers in Pitt history. And if it wasn't for a guy who might be one of the greatest receivers in college football history, Jordan Addison very well would be and could be the greatest receiver in Pitt history. As it stands now, he's the greatest receiver in the Pat Narduzzi era of Pitt football. He's the second greatest receiver in Pitt history, and he's the number 2 player in the Narduzzi era. I am sure you people will have no disagreements about anything I just said in these top 10 players. Obviously, I left some very good players off this list. Servassier Dennis, Dorian Johnson, Juan Price, Quadri Henderson. I mean, there were guys who had some really great seasons, great careers at Pitt. Izzy Abanikanda was a record setter in 2022. There have been very good players. There have been great players. But these are the top 10 for me. I'll run down the list again real quick. Number 1, Kenny Pickett. Number 2, Jordan Addison. Number 3, Tyler Boyd. Number 4, Jordan Whitehead. Number 5, Kalijah Cansey. Number 6, James Conner. Number 7, Brian O'Neill. Number 8, Patrick Jones. Number 9, Rashad Weaver. And number 10, with a chance to climb, Kyle Lewis. What do you think of that ranking? What's your take on it? And what did I get wrong? Or just tell me what I got right. That's a much more pleasant way to go about it. All right. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Thursday, folks. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit, the mailbag edition, right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.